It is my pleasure to introduce to you Josh Hayashi, who is a principal consultant for Hoku Iwa, a business that has a passion for the church. He is also a chaplain for the middle school at Punahou School. And so Josh is going to be moderating this evening's session. So turning it over to Josh.
Thanks, Lori. I think actually the greatest pleasure I have is the fact that I get to go to so many different churches. And so just to see some familiar faces here, it's really nice to see people. And I think that's, I can talk, and that I think that you can hear my one perspective, but I thought it'd be much more interesting to hear from three of your colleagues in very different situations. And because our churches are so different. So we have three panelists. We have the first person is Wayne Ibara. I'm going to share my screen here. This is a picture of his church. I'm guessing a lot of you folks may know Wayne. And he has been at Makiki Christian Church now for 25 years. Is that correct, Wayne?
Yep.
25 years. And Makiki Christian Church is this Japanese castle that we have here, and it's right in the center of Honolulu. Our next panelist is Pastor Robb Kojima, and he is on the Isle of Maui, part of Tri-Isle Association at Wailuku Union Church. And Robb, how long have you been at Wailuku Union now?
I made 30 years this year.
Wow, 30 years. Congratulations. And
I don't like change.
And I apologize for the use of this picture, but this is the only one that I could find with the type of resolution. But the third person, I'm really excited to introduce him because not everybody has met this person yet. But his name is Sage Chee. And Sage Chee is the kahu and the director at what is now Ha'ula Congregational Church. I'm not going to ask how long he's been there because it hasn't been that long. It's been about 2 years now, I'm guessing. But really, Sage's role in the community cannot be overstated. He does everything from homeless outreach to the community. He is a pastor. He does farming, has been a big part of introducing ulu. You may have noticed the ulu tree in the back of the Hawaii Conference building in Nu'uanu. There's a really big, beautiful ulu tree. That is actually from Sage himself. He's also the paddling coach at Hoku High School and does just so many different things. Like, you would be astounded at the type of pastoral work that Sage does. And so he is the acting kahu now at Ha'ula Congregational Church. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the three of them, each telling a little bit about their story. And then I'm going to ask some moderated questions for them to engage together and engage with each other. But we really want to make sure that everybody has a chance, or I mean, not everybody, but people who would like to ask questions of the different panelists would be able to do that, or ask questions of me as well. But we're going to start with Wayne. Wayne, would you mind sharing a bit about your church and about the story of your church to this point?
I would be glad to. Thank you, Josh. And thank you everybody for being here. This is kind of cool to be able to do this. There's through Zoom, I think the conference through this pandemic in a way has been more connected than we ordinarily have been for many years. And we're glad to see you all tonight. Well, as Josh has showed you the picture of Makiki Christian Church, this is the Castle Church near Ala Moana Shopping Center. The sanctuary was designed after the Kochi Castle in Japan. Kochi Castle because the founding pastor of Makiki came from Kochi, Reverend Okamura. The tower and social hall were built in the 1930s, and they're on the State Historic Register. 25 years ago, when I first came, the church was just finishing up $1 million restoration project. We're now in need of another one, which will require at least 2 to 3 times that amount of money. But we know that we're also in the situation that our UCC president, John Dorhauer, described in his book, Beyond Resistance. Maintenance costs are increasing while our congregation has been decreasing. So over the last 6 years, we've been doing what Ron Heifetz suggested we do in his talk on Saturday. We've been coming together as a congregation to consider what we should hold on to bring into the future, what we should let go of, and what we might do that we've never done before. What are new things that might be possible for us? What we have found is that these are complex and difficult questions for a congregation to deal with. They're simple to state, but they're immense issues to work through a large group of people. And when we get our congregation on a Sunday morning before the pandemic, we were somewhere between 2 English and 1 Japanese language service. We were drawing about 250 people per Sunday, perhaps. It totaled all 3 services. And when we get a church-wide English and Japanese speaking leadership group together, we were drawing around 70, 80 people. So that's a large group of people to work through complex questions. There's another leadership guru you may have heard of from before Ron Heifetz's time, Max Dupree. Max Dupree was the chair of Fuller Seminary's Board of Trustees for a while, and he wrote leadership books. And he once said that the first task of leadership is to define reality. And that's what we've been trying to do. 6 years ago, when we took stock of our need for another building repair project, we called together our congregation, Japanese and English speaking, and I thought we were going to do this pep rally, and then we would all launch a capital campaign project and repair the buildings. But we didn't bring the idea of a capital campaign to our first meeting as the predetermined solution. Instead, our moderator at the time, Bernie Kim, asked the question, if Reverend Okamura, who started the church, had arrived in Honolulu today instead of in 1890 something, what would he do? What would he do today? Would we end up with the same church building and the church that we have today? And this simple question opened up the discussion to far more than how much money do we need to raise. And it freed us to look at how the times have changed, both within and beyond the church. It enabled us to continue with the discussion we have long been having about what we believe God is calling Makiki to be and do as a church. And it freed us to entertain ideas we had never considered before. Like, should we tear down the buildings and start all over? Should we sell our property and just join with another church somewhere else? Should we convert our CE building into housing or commercial business space? You know, as word got out that we were looking at these questions, some surprising things happened. One Sunday, a couple of developers, total strangers, came to our Sunday services just so they could give me their business cards. It was pretty funny. But it told us that even if we were only now beginning to consider such possibilities, other people had long had eyes on church properties. So today we're still on our way. The pandemic, like with so many other things, have kind of put things on hold. But we're looking to proceed with a capital campaign to at least begin to address our maintenance needs. But we're also keeping open to new possibilities that we may never have thought of before. Because more and more of our members are gradually coming to see that the future for us is not going to look like what the past did. So I'm going to close with just 3 kind of random thoughts. Hopefully they will make sense, at least individually. Ron Heifetz says that the work of a leader is to bring people together to address a common challenge. You know, this is simple enough, but for the church, this means bringing our people together to make decisions that they may feel unqualified to make because they've never had to make decisions like this before. Figuring how to even start a discussion can be hard. You know, how do you talk about something with people who've never talked about them before? It takes a long time, even measured in years, for people to come to terms with a new reality. Secondly, our understanding of the purpose, mission, and identity of the church is really key. But how many of our churches can we say have a decent grasp of this question? Even after seminary and years of pastoring, I never really dealt with the question of the church. What is the church really, biblically? What is it supposed to be? What is it supposed to be trying to do? And it wasn't until the New Creation Initiative around the turn of the millennium and my introduction to missional church began that I really started to get handles on this question. So last, but maybe not necessarily least, something Fuller professor Mark Lau Branson told us many years ago when he came and he did a couple of workshops with us. He said that the most important sign of a church's vitality is not its size, it's not its budget, it's not its properties, and it's not its programs. The most important sign of a church's vitality is the kinds of conversations its people are having. I've often remembered what he said because I've often thought there is wisdom in what he said. But it struck me how rarely a church engages in these kinds of conversations. I think we never do unless we are led to do so. So I think that is the opportunity and the real potential for many of our congregations today.
Thank you, Wayne. So just again, we have 3 different speakers from 2 from Oahu, 1 from the Tri-Isle Association, but 1 is an AHEC church, 1 is rural. And we were kind of saying this beforehand. What's going to be important here is that it's a kaleidoscope of different situations. You're going to see part of your church in one and part of it in another. And maybe that part of the answer is going to be a mix of those different things because all of your situations are unique and individual. And so with that, I want to introduce our next speaker. We have Robb Kojima.
Thank you for the opportunity to share the story of Wailuku Union Church. I've been there for 30 years and this, I guess January 15th was the anniversary. So it's kind of exciting to be there. And I think that the church has evolved in many ways. 5 years ago, if we were to look at what the church looked like, we had a declining membership, maybe about 50 people in church and 120 people on the rolls. We paid our bills each year with the help of the soda concession at the county fair. And we also have 3 buildings that we're able to rent. So those things together made our budget balance each year. And if we needed anything else, like for repairs of a building or a new organ or anything like that, we would have to do a fund drive to raise the extra funds. 5 years ago, we hired a concert pianist just out of the blue. We left this want ad in the Maui News and she responded from Florida and she became our music director. And since then, she's been starting music concerts in our sanctuary. So that was like 5 years ago, which is kind of exciting for us. And we were playing host to the Equipping Tomorrow's Church Leaders, an educational event sponsored by the Tri-Isle Association. But one of the side effects of having these guest speakers come and to do the presentations in our social hall was that the crew that worked in the kitchen got to sit in on many of the sessions and started to grow theologically. And that created kind of like a different core in the life of our congregation. Our church today, still small membership, faithful people, and we are pursuing a venture of building 40 affordable rental units on 2.5 acres that we have right in the heart of Wailuku. The other change for us because of the pandemic is that we discovered that our webpage needed to be updated and we're on Facebook for worship service, which we haven't been before. And now we have contact with people as far as New Jersey and some in Oklahoma and New Mexico. And it's been really kind of exciting to see that there can be an and outreach beyond just Wailuku. There are some things that have gotten us to this place where we are now. We went through a process of discernment in order to become missional, to think about, not just to think about ourselves, but to think about the gifts that God has given to us and how we can best use them, and how we can use the things that God has given in ways that would be part of how God would use them, right? And that's what led us to kind of explore what to do with the 2.5 acres we had in Wailuku. The driving biblical story that has become a part of our theme for maybe the last 20 years has been the parable of the Good Samaritan. And one of the questions that we asked was, who's the fallen traveler that is being ignored? And we came up with adults with differently abled adults and what kind of housing they would need. And then it went on to seniors and others. And now we are looking at affordable housing that could include all of these various target people that we'd like to provide housing for. One of the other things we did was that we decided to practice being Christians in the way that we treated each other, in the way that we worked together, and even in the way that we conducted our meetings. And so we moved from majority rules to consensus whenever possible. And so that really has changed kind of like the way that we do things and how we see each other. As we kind of look ahead at our church, we're looking at the Wailuku Mission Housing project that we are working on as something to be as a gift that the church will be giving to the community. And the reason why we like rentals instead of creating housing for sale is because we've seen the turnaround too often where people build affordable housings, people move into them, and then a few years later, they turn around and sell them at market rate. And so there is no affordable housing. So we're keeping them as rentals. We will be the owners of that property. We're partnering with another company in order to do this, a developer, and they will run it, but it will remain affordable housing. And this becomes a gift to our community and to the surrounding churches too, because it's going to have an impact on all of us as to how we do ministry and this population and who God brings into our community in order to bring new life and vitality there. The other thing that we look at too is that the church in the future is going to be different. I was listening to a webinar sponsored by the United Church of Christ, and it was about new church starts and the future of the church. And one of the things they said is that the church in the future is not going to be meeting in sanctuaries. They're going to be meeting in coffee houses, in bars, in cafes. They're going to meet in libraries and conference rooms and laundromats. And they're going to gather around common interest and common caring. And they may not meet every week and maybe not even on Sundays, but the leaders are going to be good-hearted people who have a sense of calling. These models of church are not going to be self-sustaining. They will have to look for sponsorships in order to help provide, pay for their leader, pay for their building and whatever. And this is where we come in, because if the Wailuku Mission Housing Project is successful, in the future, we may find that there will be an income more than what we need. And so we can become the connective tissue in order to form relationships with these versions of the church that they can be part of our expression of Wailuku Union Church. And we will continue to help and make subsidies maybe for their leadership and also encourage them to continue to be connected to us and to our association and to the conference and also to the national church, as well for their training, like through PSR and what they're doing through the CTEL program and what the Tri-Isle has done through ETCL. The only disclaimer that I'm going to say is that Adam and Eve didn't know what they were doing. Abraham and Sarah didn't know what they were doing. Jacob and Joseph didn't know what they were doing. Moses certainly didn't know what he was doing. The apostles at Pentecost didn't know what they were doing. The early church fuddled around. The reformers didn't know what they were doing. And even us, postmodern, pandemic-stricken, don't know what we are doing as we make adaptations and accommodations. But in every situation, there was a movement of the Spirit that was helping. And so that's what we need to rely on. The only other thing I wanted to end with was that we are looking at new definitions of the church, right? Because we used to think the church is the building and like, right, here's all the people, but it's not that anymore. And I kind of like what John Dorhauer said. He said the church embodies a God who is love. The church loves as displayed in Jesus. And the church lives love through the Holy Spirit.
Thank you, Rob. Okay. And now our third speaker, super excited to have him with us, Brother Sage Chee.
I don't know how we got into this order of things because Rob and Wayne was incredible. I learned a lot just by being the third speaker, and it adjusted what I had to say. And I'm trying to stay focused on what my original intent was, which means it's exciting for this venue today. That's what this venue is supposed to provide for us, is this different perspective of what the church is going through today. And let me introduce myself and start off with a big warm aloha. And I'm from Ha'ula, and I really appreciate Josh, but he spoke of me and some of the work I do, but I wanted to focus on something. I wanted to focus on that photo behind me. So if you can see the backdrop, that was taken in the morning when the sun was just coming up off the horizon, and it started to reflect on what the church looks like right now, with a new sign up that says under construction, so the community knows something is happening in their community. Because you all know, we just navigated a very challenging time for the church in this past 2 years. I had the call about 2.5 years ago. I had the call that Ha'ula Congregational Church needed help. And I understand why I was called, because a number of times I've used that church. I baptized my grandchildren into the church. I was looking back, I think it's as long as about 12 years ago when I did a baptism in that church, when it was functioning. And then it came to a place, like all of you know, the congregation is starting to dwindle so much that it ended up really just being the board that was trying to sustain the church, because they didn't have the succession ahead of them. But they had this certain wisdom that I wanted to talk about. Because coming out of the 90s, coming into the early 2000s, they knew that the church had to be put into a place where there would be oversight and stewardship long after they're gone. And they looked at, how do we set this up? Because I was just going through a lot of the old, we did a lot of research in this past 2 years. There's a lot of litigation that went on that you all know about it. But then we looked at how the church evolved and how the different land patterns transformed from during one time to another time, how the name of the church, when it originally was formed, when the early missionaries came, and within the first 20 years of missionaries being here, Ha'ula came to mind. And to me, that's an amazing miracle for our community. And then the Lanakila Church was built. That was within the first 20 to 25 years when the first missionaries came. And this was as early as 1840. And God had a plan. that he had a plan for all of us. Because about 100 years ago, you all know, the roof caved in of that church, right? Little over 100 years ago. And about 100 years ago from last year, they built that sanctuary that we have now, the one that is standing right behind me. And there were songs written about this transfer. And I found out from the kupunas who had written songs and shared stories that really that was a temporary sanctuary. That really, when they built that church, it was smaller than the original church. And their plan was to rebuild the original Lanakila church that stood on the Hauula congregational property. And I remember when I was young, I lived right on the boundaries of that church property. And every morning on Sunday, we could hear the bell toll. We knew congregational services was starting. My father was a kahu with Uhani Hemolele Pi'ikea, Family of the Living God Church. My tutu was a kahu before that with Kamakua Maloa and often with Kamakapili. She attended all the Hawaiian churches in Honolulu, and whenever she was out in Hauula, she attended that church. And I would hear this bell tolling, but I remember walking up to the church many times. And at that time, the church walls used to stand. Lanakila church walls was still intact. It was slowly falling down back in the 60s, coming into the 70s. Finally, they had to knock the walls down because it was taking too long. And the generations that passed really lost to rebuild the church never became the vision. Moving forward, the vision was, how do we keep the church full, that little sanctuary? How do we continue to prepare us for this transition into this new millennium that's ahead of us? Because they saw that the board itself was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But you know, there was wisdom in that, because then they looked at how should we steward this property. And one day they decided, and it took a lot of prayers, it took a lot of conversation. And finally they decided that they need to put this church under the umbrella of Hawaii Conference Foundation, United Church of Christ. Because looking at all the transfer of land and the transition of the church, it finally got conveyed in 2000, somewhere in 2008, the final conveyance happened. And that was the wisest thing that they did, because they knew that if anything happens to them, that somehow the church would continue. And the amazing thing is, 3 years ago, I had that, or 2.5 years ago, I had that invitation to help. And I'm thankful because Hawaii Conference Foundation, and with Josh, started looking at the remaining board members and saying, you know what can we do? And the outreach to the community. And I think this is really important, because they looked at community buy-in. And of course, they looked at the faith community. And that's where I was serving. Our ministry, I've been serving that community, not just the community, but I've done work. We do work around the island. We are in the Next Step shelter. I was there on that floor when we put that shelter in with Governor Lingo back in those days. My father did work with Institute for Human Services, River of Life. We've been working with indigent in our community for a long time. And I knew that there was this new calling. Serving the community is where my heart always was, because it's one thing about helping the whole state, but we have to make sure like that our family is okay, the community is okay. So returning to the community was really important at the time. So, and that was a blessing. And then with all the challenges that we face right now, I want to reflect to something where I have my hope in. And we open to the word in John today, in John chapter 1. He says, John chapter 1, verse 12, but to those who did accept him, he gave power to become children of God. And the amazing thing is that power has been given to the community. because our faith community has been doing something for the past, I got to say for the past decade, maybe 2 decades, is we have been collaborating together to help each other across denominational lines, across every church. I would say every church, from the Catholic Church to the Baptist Church to the Protestant, to all the different churches in the community, even reaching out to the LDS Church. Everybody's been working on preparing our community. And that's the exciting thing. So I think that's where I'm looking at, that's where our equity lies right now, is in the community and in all those that believe, because we may be separated by denomination, some of these churches, but we all have the same, we have that drive that we fill up the pews, that we use our churches to serve the community because our children is getting lost. So it's an exciting time for me. We've come a long way. The first thing we did, you all know that we really took control of the property back in October. Since then, we've already invested, I have to say, we invested in the repair of the roof and the repair of the foundation. We already submitted for the next stage of permitting, where we're gonna be repairing all the termite eaten walls and get the sanctuary to a place where we can start using it again. And we didn't stop there, because another thing the Kupunas did, everyone from Uncle Kale, Charles Hatchett, Auntie Rachel, and Auntie Kuni, you know what they did was they put together some renderings and left it in the office. And when I went in there, after the place was ransacked, I found behind the desk all these renderings that they generated from the years. And a lot of it showed what their vision was to build a hall, get another facility built so that it can serve the church and that we can serve the community. So that's the next step that's going on. I invite everyone out to Hau'ula, and there may be a lot of questions in regards to all the other issues, from litigation to working with the community that we went through. So I'll be open for whatever questions you guys have. Mahalo.
Thank you, Sage. So 3 very, very different stories. And I think I'm actually really hopeful listening to those stories, and having a chance to kind of see them up close. And I'm guessing that we may have some questions here, whether they're for one of these gentlemen, or for me, or for anybody else. Please feel free. If not, I'm happy to offer some questions for them, or for some discussion.
I have a question or a comment. Is that okay? Can we do just
that is really okay, David.
Okay, well, kind of directing it at Wayne. I just thought what Wayne said and how he expressed the process of really looking at what is, and because their church is so much tradition. I mean, if there ever is a church of tradition, look at that building. And for those people to come together and say, is this what the future is in this building? And it just so happens that, I'm Makiki Christian's insurance agent. So it's a really, it all connects and it fits. So is the church going to insure that beautiful building to its full value and just maybe drain just too many resources? Or is it going to envision something different? So I think that takes a lot of courage and creativity. And I think they're on the right track. Wayne, I think you guys are on the right track. And I think many more churches have to do that, especially the ones that have buildings that were designed for congregations so much bigger. You have to do what you guys are doing. So it's a comment. So great. Thank you.
That's a really interesting comment, David. I think one of the things, Wayne, I don't mean to answer for you or to say this on your behalf, but the founder, and that's why that Bernie and Wayne asked that question. His name is Reverend Okamura. His legacy is so significant, I think so related to this conversation. Reverend Okamura, at the turn of the century, partly for his passion for the Japanese people, but for the gospel, he himself was the main force in founding not just Makiki Christian Church, but he had a big hand in Kuakini Hospital, in the Nu'uanu YMCA, in the AJA Baseball League, and the Okamura Boys and Girls Home. His great-grandson is DK Kodama for the Kodama restaurants.
Wow.
His son was the first child at Punahou School that was of Japanese descent. Wow. But I think one of the things that is really, really important to note about that was that someone like Okamura Sensei, and there are others like that, the last time Honolulu was in such a state of probably crisis was after the Great Chinatown Fire. Mm-hmm. And the Great Chinatown Fire and what happened after that, two churches in particular, or at least that's relevant to our conversation, responded. And one was Makiki Christian Church, or not Makiki, it was Nu'uanu Congregational Church through Reverend Okamura and founding of Kuakini Hospital. But the second was Central Union Church and the founding of Palama Settlement. Mm-hmm. And that to me is the model for what we should be doing. Because it's these unselfish gifts of generosity and activity to serve the community. And that's kind of what we're seeing in different ways through these different people here. But I think those are the church leaders we should be talking and thinking about. The ones who are in the community, kind of what, and I think Sage in some ways is a reflection of that next generation of what that means. But I think that those kinds of folks are the ones that really inspire me. And I think the Chinese churches had those folks. The Hawaiian churches certainly had those folks as well. Those are just kind of the ones who are immediately connected to this conversation now.
My question is for Pastor Robb. So I heard you say you all had the 2.5 acres in Wailuku, and I saw the picture of your beautiful church, when you were talking, and I was like, wow, that is a gorgeous church. I'm just curious, are those 2.5 acres part of your church campus, or was it separate land you owned in Wailuku? And just if you could expound on that a little more for me, please.
It's kind of on the next block. The way we got the property is, well, there are 3 churches in Wailuku. There's mine, there's Kahumanu, and there's Iao. And between the Bailey House Museum and Kahumanu Church was the parsonage for the pastor of the Wailuku mission. And through different turns of events, it became the parsonage for Wailuku Union Church. And so that's how we got it. But it's maybe about 100 yards away from the church's campus. So it's a separate piece of property.
Okay.
Martha, what island are you on?
I'm on Oahu.
So the equivalent property would be the Mission Houses Museum property in downtown Honolulu. So it's right across from City Hall. Was the family home of the Alexander family.
Yes.
So like Alexander and Baldwin. So on that property was where one of the Alexanders married one of the Baldwins. So the Alexander A and B Foundation is involved in the project as well. They donated to the project, and they believe in the legacy and what Pastor Wayne and their church is doing.
I think it's awesome. I was just curious if that property was being used by your church did you have to divert it from one use to another use, and how you all navigated that?
There are actually like 4 buildings on that property, and then the rest of it is vacant. And so in the church records, I found a rendering of a church building with tennis court in the front that the pastor of Wailuku Union had the idea that maybe we would create one church with all the churches, and that never worked. And so there is a huge vacant area of that property. And so part of the discussion that the church congregation had, as we're looking at, what is God calling us to do? Here we have this piece of property. We're reading the passages that talked about how the master is gone and the stewards are there and how they have to take care of the place. And so we asked, what would God want to do with this property that we could do? What is it that God wants us to do with this property? And then as we're looking and thinking about what's going on in the community, we were thinking about providing housing for those who special needs adults. And that's what set us on this journey. The other value that we had was we didn't want to pay for it ourselves. We wanted to do it without paying any money. And there's a really good chance that that's going to come true too. So that's really phenomenal that what we decided to do as a church was to chase the different pockets of money that were available in order to do the project. So we started with adult housing, we started with senior housing, then we went to senior housing, then we went to group home, and then we went to HUD housing, and now we're looking at affordable rental units. So we were willing to change our specifics of the project according to how we thought that God was going to be able to provide for this in a way that we didn't have to pay for it.
Rob, we have another question for you. Please describe the process of discernment that your church members went through.
I think that one of the things that we needed to do was we needed to listen to each other. We needed to listen to God. We needed to be reading different kinds of things. And so pretty much how we started was, I think we started by saying, you know, what is it that God is calling us to do? And we shared different scriptures that came up with each other. And then all of that led to a process where we said, well, let's imagine what it is that God is calling us to do. And we came up with 5 images. I don't know if I can remember them all, but one was that we would be the people of God, being the people of God, so treating each other nicely. That we are a surrogate family, because that's part of our history, that we seem to have a lot of people that belong to the church who are new to Maui, and we became their family. We also saw us as people on a journey that were following God. And one other illustration was that of a medical ship, that we would go along and people would come and we would heal them. And some of the people that we healed became part of the crew, and then they would leave someplace else. And then the last vision we had of the church was that of a tapestry, that the tapestry is made up of all these discarded bits of pieces of color and thread and cloth, all woven together in order to create a picture. And so on one side, you see the ends of threads and all of that and knots. And on the other side, there was a picture. Then we started praying about what that picture was. And we came up with the picture of the Good Samaritan. And so we were also working on our mission statement, right? And the mission statement came out very similar to love God and love your neighbor. And so then the Good Samaritan fed into that. And then the question that we had, like I said about the property, was who's a fallen traveler that needs our attention? And so as we looked at that, we came up with the agreement that at that point, it was those who needed housing. And so that's pretty much is what has driven us. And along the way, we got continued confirmation and clarification and definition to the vision that we had.
Oh, hey, Rob, this is Becky.
Yeah.
So that was my question. So did you guys do this like in a retreat setting over several months, like every other month, or like a Saturday gathering, or did you guys go away someplace, you know, or it was like one afternoon?
I think we went to Honolulu. No. No.
In a hotel, okay. Around the pool.
Actually, it started when we were doing things with the New Creation Initiative.
Okay.
And when we were going through that planning, strategic planning, it brought up a lot of questions for us to look at. And then it also made us do a lot of homework. And one of the homework that we had to do was we had to look at what our community was, our constituency. We also had to look at our history from a missional point of view. Because whenever we look at our history, we always looked at it according to what the pastor did, right? So there's this pastor and this is what this pastor did. But to look at our history according to what the mission of the church was and what are the things that they did and create that timeline was very different. And so it was, so like New Creation was like maybe 3 or 4 or 4 to 5 years. So that process along with asking those questions. And so the project itself, we've been working on it for about 20 years, continuing to go one lead, have it change, do something else, find new people, fueled for a new direction, and then have to adjust and change. But we are actually really at the point where we have a really good partner that's going to be working with us on the development. And we got some money. It was just amazing. We got like $350,000 from the state, and we just received $1 million grant towards the project. And so we're on our way. I don't know if I answered your question, but it was a long process, and it wasn't just a few retreats at the hotel.
Now, your core group, did that change, or did you have the same people with you for the last 2 decades?
That has changed because people have come and gone. But I think that what happens though is that it's not just the core group that held the vision, but it became, with the dialogue and the conversations that we have had, it's been pretty much the congregation that has the vision. In fact, last Sunday, on Ash Wednesday, I had this one member of the church come to me and says, "Oh, I think that it's going to be great that, like, at the Alexander House, which is the building that we own on that property, that if it did become a meeting place, then that could be one version of the church." And so here, the conversations that we have about the property and maybe even the future of the church is starting to take seed, in that there are other people who have the same idea that might be a form of Wailuku Union Church, other than everybody gathered in the sanctuary on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock.
Are there other questions, comments, concerns?
Can I share my stuff from Costco?
Is it edible?
No. Okay. So I got this from Costco. The Costco magazine is really great. And so what I did was I changed some of the words in order to help me. And it says, like, so this is how the church can get ahead of the game. So playing the infinite game of church. So I kind of edited a little bit for my purposes. But I thought that this is one of the things that we as a church need to do, is that we need to kind of continue to have our vision kind of point forward, right? Can you imagine that what we're doing as church is playing an infinite game with finite mindset? And so in order for us to do this, to be a winning church, is that there are certain things we need to do. Is that the goal is to keep playing. And with that means that we need to have a mission. And then we also need to practice and form community, with the people that we're playing with, right? Because there's rules, there's good behavior, there's manners, all of those kinds of things. We need to have a worthy rival. And maybe it's failure. Maybe it's, different temptations that are there, but oftentimes, maybe it's Satan. Sometimes the rival really causes us to step our game and make sure we're doing the best. And then it also talked about a flexible playbook. Oh man, I wish they had that at the Super Bowl. Anyway, you need to adapt, you need to invent, you need to be creative, you need to adjust, you need to change your perspective. And then you also need to risk for God, because that's what faith is. And so the church community is to create an environment of grace where we can try new things, even if they fail, to learn, to adjust, to adapt, and to do better the next time, or to stop doing it. And I just, whenever I read the Costco magazines, I always find something. The last time I was reading it, I found out that it's not retirement, it's being career free. So I'm using that as my mantra right now. But it talks about here again that the churches that build the strongest culture are the most innovative. And so really, we need to be innovative as churches. We need to imagine, we need to use the freedom that Christ gives us in order for us to do different kinds of things, just like what we hear is happening in Haula. And then instead of survival, we can be missional. Okay, That's all I had. Costco. The gospel according to Costco.
So I think one of the things I was hoping for us to be able to come away from this is that there are lots of different things happening. And I think the exciting thing is that in some ways, the Ho'ula story is both a cautionary tale, but it is also a story of hope. And I think all these stories are actually stories of hope because we forget that God is still doing stuff. And God still has a plan for your neighborhoods. And God still wants to use you folks and what's happening in your congregations to do these things. And again, the needs in the community are so significant. And they need your help. And they could use your property or other things in some ways that that may surprise you. I get about a call a week, and that's no joke, from homeless organization or homeless outreach groups, other churches, nonprofits that are looking for spaces. And these are all folks whose mission would tie in with what you folks are doing, and also provide you folks some great insight into the community. You know, the hard part is they don't know who to call. And not just not know who to call, but how do we create these kinds of relationships? And so there are lots of things happening out there. But I just want to say this, like, this is the time for us to be able to respond. The neighborhoods need you more than ever. They need you to be the presence of Christ. And I do have to say, like, I think one of the challenges that we have is, and I don't mean to sound this pessimistically, but I don't think there's going to be the next group of pastors that's going to come and rescue your church. I mean, I say this all the time, and it's really kind of crazy and scary, but there are only three pastors under the age of 60 in the Oahu Association that are local. There's one who's under the age of 60 in AHEC, and I think he's in this meeting somewhere. But there's only like 4 of us total on Oahu anyway. And that's a significant challenge. There's 1 person in seminary, 1. The other thing too is that part of the challenge is not your programming, or if you're not attracting young people, it's just that young people in general are leaving Hawaii. If I were to ask you, how many of you folks, your kids or grandkids are not coming back? I would guess there's quite a few of that's like that. And that's really the case of what we're dealing with. I was watching Jeff Aceto, that his presentation from the other day, and I thought, this is so exciting. And then, like, what? He lives in Seattle now? He's not even in Hawaii anymore? And I think like that is kind of like the symbol of, it's those kind of realities that we have to deal with. What does it mean to make Hawaii livable? And that is what I'm excited about, because that's what you see is what Robb's trying to do in a way, or Robb's church. That's kind of what you see with what Sage in a lot of ways are trying to deal with too. And that's also going to be some of the questions that Makiki is going to be tackling as well. What does it mean to reach Honolulu? What does it mean to live out justice? Not just talk about it or march, but actually to do something about it. Now I am already getting tired of hearing myself, and I don't know if you folks want to hear me get on this soapbox, but now is the time for us to act. And there are people out there, or organizations, government, who are all waiting for us to act. I've talked to so many different council members on other islands and here, and senators. Like, we've been waiting for the church to get involved in affordable housing, but we don't know how to have that conversation. So that's one of the exciting thing about Robb is doing, is that Robb has a partnership, or this Wailuku Union Church has both the Maui County and the state of Hawaii partnering with a nonprofit and a church. Okay, that's like really unusual. We hope that's a trend that will continue to move forward. So the partnerships are there, and the willingness and the need and the communities are out there too. And I'm really excited. Any other questions or thoughts or comments or concerns?
Can I comment?
Yes. Yes, Warren.
This is Warren on Maui. Thank you, Josh. Rob, I love you dearly. I appreciate everything your church is doing. I think it's fantastic. But in context of the larger scope, Wailuku Union in doing what it's doing, not to your detriment, but just in comment, it would have been nice to incorporate the association in support of your project. So we could have done it collectively. And in terms of representing the church in community for housing and for improvement of general environmental issues, it would have been nice for our church to have a unified voice rather than a single voice. So I don't disagree with you. I commend you for what you guys have done. You've done a great job. Maybe I feel just a little left out that we weren't involved with the conversation, because I think collectively, maybe we could have done a little bit more, maybe not, I don't know. But when we look at the strategies of incorporating the activities of the church within the realm of doing impact on the general community, as far as how does a church impact social issues such as housing or hungry in the community, maybe we should look at a unified effort through the association and maybe possibly even conference in a collective manner rather than in a unilateral manner. And not to say that any unilateral effort is inconsequential. It is absolutely vital. But here in our association, we have Rob doing a great job there. Yao's feeding about 150 families every couple of weeks. Down at Kilauea, they're serving about 100 or 200 families every week on the food bank. I mean, there's some tremendous things going on, but collectively, we're not identified. And so maybe that might be a focus that we could do. And Josh, if you take the lead on this thing or give us some sense of direction or leadership, maybe we can put this thing together so we can provide a unified front to the community as to what the benefit is of this United Church of Christ and how we serve our community and our calling to serve God. End of comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. I appreciate your support and your comment. The pattern of what has happened since I've been at Wailuku Union Church, and especially, kind of like in order for us to do what we're doing, is that I have successfully whittled away the attendance at the church from 100 people attending to 50. And that actually, one of the things that happened was it made it easier for us to make decisions. And I think in the decision making and the formation and to be able to shift around from one focus to another, I think God put together the people that we needed in order to do this work at this time. And it's kind of like the 1 Corinthians 12 part where the body of Christ and God assembles the parts as according to what they needed. And so there's going to be lots of opportunity beyond this. Once things get settled and the permits made and we are actually going to be doing this, then I think there's going to be lots of opportunity for Iao and Kahumanu and the association to participate in what comes after this because of what we have done. But in this format up until this year, everything has been a dream. And it's part of the call that we felt that we were trying to execute to see if this is what God wanted us to do. And it's come to a place where we're feeling like it's actually going to become a reality. So we didn't want, I don't know, you're right. I think we tried to kind of let some people know. I know I've talked with Tino and I talked with Pastor Wayne also about this. So, but it is something that we know that going forward, we're not going to be able to do by ourselves. We are going to need the support of Iao and the support of Kahumanu and also Good Shepherd and the community for this thing to be built.
Well, but Warren, I think you bring up a really good point in that this is good work and we all want to be a part of it. I think the part though that, just to kind of tie back to what Pastor Robb was saying, we have to be able to make mistakes. And so that may have been an oversight. And so apologies.
No, it's not about apologies or mistake. We are all in this together and we would love to have made the mistakes together. And we would have loved to have done the apologies together, because with Iao and Wailuku Union and Kaumanu, there's only aloha. There is no animosity. It's all aloha. So anyway, I'm just drawing this on a broader scope, that if we want to impact the overall community in concept of church, we should take a wonderful concept like Robb's concept and Wailuku Union and use that as a magnet to draw other churches in, so we can create a bigger picture of what the UCC actually is. That was my overall picture. It was, and Rob, I didn't mean to step on any toes. If I did, I apologize. I didn't mean to. It was totally in support of what you're doing, but I was just pushing on a broader picture. Thank you.
I wanted to share this book that I've started to read. It just came out last week. It's by Mark Lau Branson and Alan Roxburgh, who are teachers some of us are familiar with. Mark is at Fuller Seminary. Alan Roxburgh has been an author and teacher in church settings for many, many years. I'm going to read a sentence from the last chapter. This is not an easy book. It's not a popular book. It's written for pastors and people in seminaries but church leaders. Leadership, God's Agency and Disruptions. The last chapter is called Practicing Amidst God's Agency, which gives you an example of how technical and kind of strange the language is. But it says, this book has proposed that the vocation of leaders in the great unraveling, by which they mean what is happening in our churches today with the change and the decline and the challenges and everything else. The vocation of leaders in the great unraveling is forming local communities of God's people who are discerning and participating in God's agency in their neighborhoods and communities. What the book is encouraging is, I'm bringing this up because I think Sage's experience at Hauula is an example of the kind of community connection, specific community relationships and connection that get wound up in a churches, in a faith quest for something better for the blessing of the community. And the general counsel of this book is that the way that the Spirit has worked they go through a number of Bible stories from Jeremiah to Acts to Ephesians and more. But the way the Spirit works is when people of faith are confronted with someone who is different from themselves, that creates the opportunity for the Spirit to do new things, as Jews with Gentiles, for example. They encourage us today to look at the places where in our ordinary lives, they're not advocating doing something new, more, better, or whatever. They're encouraging us to simply be present where we are in our neighborhoods and our communities, but to pay particular attention to the marginalized people, which is, a theme of what Wailuku did with thinking about what it might do with its properties. And so I commend this book because I think it illustrates, it supports the stories of both Wailuku and Hauula in what these two churches have experienced. You can serve as examples of what Branson and Roxburgh are talking about. And they're looking toward the future of what the church is likely to look like in the decades to come.
Thanks, Pastor Wayne. Any other questions or thoughts?
I'm just amazed of what's going on right now. And I see clearly that both with what Pastor Robb is doing and Pastor Wayne is doing, both of them and all of us together, is really we're becoming a model for what God has planned in front of us. And that we're going to traverse whatever we're going through right now for a greater purpose. Because I know this, communities are probably in worse shape than where Hau'ula was at. Yet we was at a place that was challenging and needed patience. And we needed that heart. And the only way I know that we could traverse that was to have this heart of Christ and to have this patience and be able to see and persevere in this time so we could see the finish line. But for those like our brother there, our pastor out in Maui, Robb, what he's doing, it'll become a model for all these relationships moving forward, because the conversation have already been started in Hau'ula about how do we keep our children, our grandchildren home in affordable rentals or affordable housing. And all of these issues are the issues that are being talked about between the churches and between the associations and in the neighborhood board right now. And I believe that the faith community, our churches, can play a big role, or at least we can use models like Robb on how do we start getting that kind of support and that happening in our community. So I know you're going to be an example and a model. And that's the amazing thing, because that's what Christ does. And I just want to give him the thanks. So I'm excited about all of you out there.
We do want to be sensitive if people need to get going. But the fact that we still have most people here, it sounds like this is really interesting. And I think, to be honest, like one of the things that I've been learning in kind of walking alongside some of these churches is that conflict is just going to be part of it. And so, you may be feeling exciting things, but you also may be feeling really a lot of maybe fear too, or anxiety, or like in my congregation started this conversation, it would just be like, whatever. And does anybody have any kind of experience or stories, maybe Robb in particular, or Wayne, about, or even Sage, about conflict and how we've kind of like helped our congregations move through some of these tough conversations?
You want me to talk about conflict? Actually, there really is a lot, because we have expectations of what the church is supposed to be and what the pastor is supposed to be. And when you move from a model that's chaplaincy, where the pastor is the paid Christian for the whole community, and when you all need to take responsibility in ministering and calling and taking care of each other, it's disruptive, and it can cause conflict for the pastor and for the church. So it really has to be a process where we work together, we listen together. In one sense, I had a list here of things. I don't have any formulas of what to do, but I have formulas as to what not to do, right? So, don't be judgmental, don't be afraid, don't be proud or arrogant. Don't think that you have to have all the answers. Don't stay attached to your building. Don't rip the bandage off, because you need to make decisions that people are good with, so that when it starts to hurt, it hurts only a little bit at a time. Then one great hurt when you pull the bandage off. And so those are the kinds of things that we found, is that, I don't make decisions on my own. And if the congregation says no, then we do something else. So that's pretty much and so because of that, I think we have a good relationship.
Thanks, Robb. So we have leader churches like Robb's church and a few others in the association, but out of 18 or 20, including Ehek, he's the exception. So there's another 15 that really have no clue what's going on. So if we're going to function in the context of church, I think we need to incorporate behind the leaders. And if we could get some assistance from the leaders so we can corral the rest of the acquiescent or quiet churches to stand behind the leader churches in context of the association support, I think that may be very powerful. I tried to do that as association president a couple of years ago, and it was quite difficult, but I don't think it's impossible, because we had great response. So, Rob, I'm offering myself up as the things that you do. I mean, you know what I do, or what I try to do. Anyway, but I think in support of your program, if we could corral the association to come up with a statement of support, I think that would be tremendous, not just for your program, but for the UCC and for the Trial Association. That's it.
I'm Art Shalom from the Community Church of Honolulu, and just a word of thanks to all of you. What I've been hearing for the past hour plus is wonderful language, good aloha. And what I heard from Warren was that bringing that language, bringing that love, making it more visible in the community through our actions as well as our malamaing everybody. Boy, what a wonderful way to start that process. And I think as we at Community Church continue to move forward on not only sharing the language, but providing to our communities the language we write and speak, then that spirit, I think, can then start being part of the community. And the community may not just get used to the newspaper language or what they hear on the news type of language, but truly the word provided in a certain framework to lift up all people within your community. So now I love the United Church of Christ. I like the word community. I love the language which I heard today. I love the truth that's being spoken today out of love. So thank you. Love that.
You know, one of the things, Art, that I think in particular for you folks, you know, part of this is really looking at history. And each of all of our churches has specific histories and backgrounds and legacies. I mean, just looking at Wayne Higa with the Kahumanu in the background there. But in some ways, like I feel like for you folks at Community Church, you know, there are few churches that have had a greater impact in creating modern Honolulu more than your church, right? I think it may not be able to understate the role of Community Church in creating modern Honolulu, right? With the Ching family, with the Wool family, with the Luke family. So the main banks, Aloha Airlines, and I'm saying that because it's already in your DNA. You folks already did this. You helped create modern Honolulu. And so that legacy is already there for you folks. It's just a way of kind of, and similar to what Pastor Robb is doing and to what Pastor Wayne they're trying to do. And for sure, in a renewal way, what Ha'ula is trying to do, the DNA is already there. And same with EL, especially, right? That the housing already on that building was built for housing, or that property, right? That was a huge part of it. The history is, a lot of what you're going to be looking for is already what's in the history of the buildings and the legacies of your communities themselves. And so I would just really encourage you, you know, that you folks in particular have had such an outsized impact on Honolulu that you have forgotten. And I think God is calling you to say, hey, this is who we were. We helped change, we helped literally build Honolulu. And so I just really want to encourage you in particular, but for all of us in that. I mean, all of your churches have those kinds of legacies in different ways. And it's just kind of a matter of kind of listening and rediscovering what that means, I think.
I love that. Thank you, Josh. And I know for this time, for this church of today, this congregation is ready to build Hawaii, maybe by not building the banks or the cash or the property, but through the love and caring for the common person and for those who are maligned or in need. Keeping that history, yes, definitely. But we have a long ways to go in sharing and spreading the word and God's love, which together, I believe, will make Hawaii, in fact, a more amazing place to live and raise our dear and wonderful families and friends. But thank you for those kind, kind words and appreciation.
Thank you very much to Josh, Wayne, Rob, and Sage. And thank you all for joining us.